it's a blessing and a curse, but we got rid of the Eberflus because he's kind of like a flu to the Chicago Bears. I mean, I would love your guys' feedback, being non-Bears fan, being a little bit more bipartisan. Because it's pretty freaking embarrassing as a Bears fan what happened. And the thing is that this is now 4 games, not even throughout the season, in a row that the Bears could and should have won. Maybe 3, the Minnesota game, we recovered the onside kick. So, but 3 of 4 then.
Yeah, it's incredible how poor he is at decision making. And now that he's not a head coach, I honestly would take him back as a defensive coordinator for the Colts, because we need a new defensive coordinator for the Colts. And he would honestly be great, probably as a defensive coordinator only. If he doesn't have any other decision making power other than the defense, I think he would be a fine. But Brandon and I talked at the beginning of the year about how it would make sense to start fresh with a quarterback and a coach at the same time. And still, yet, they've managed to fire their coach and waste their quarterback's first season under a head coach that didn't really matter. So they should have listened and fired him at the beginning of the year, is my opinion.
Unbelievable! Touchdown! Oh my, that may be one of the great throws ever made.
Daddy, chill.
Sebastian?
Playoffs.
Are we talking about playoffs today?
Playoffs? Don't talk about it. Playoffs? You kidding me? Playoffs? I just hope we can win a game.
We're talking about playoffs. We're not quite to the playoffs, but we're talking about playoffs. Playoff implications. But before we get to the implications of playoffs, there's some daddies that probably need to know how playoffs work. And I feel like, you guys have been longtime daddies. I think sometimes I can still even get confused with how playoffs work. It's a little bit confusing. The rules aren't specifically out there. You just got to know, as one should. So obviously the top 7 get in, and the bottom 7 are in the losers bracket. Obviously all 14, whatever bracket you're in, matters. But for the winners bracket, that number 1 seed obviously is the most important. And every seed in there is actually really important. The number 1 seed, though, most important, they get the bye that first week, so they automatically move on to the next one. Everyone else is the number 2 is playing the number 7, so the best seed alive is playing the worst seed alive in their winners brackets. And then as they advance into the second round, it continues to be reorganized, so the best seed plays the worst seed. So if the 7 seed loses in round 1, then the number 1 seed will be realigned to play the number 6 seed that following round. Aaron, does that make sense? Yes. Okay. I'm getting head nods, quiet head nods. For the losers bracket, it works in a similar way. The only thing that's a little bit more confusing is it wants to move if you look at the bracket on ESPN, it wants to move the person along if they win. And so I'll have to reorganize that because the loser will move on to the next round. So the goal is to be eliminated by winning your round. And so the worst team right now, looking at it, it says it's Chubbs, which we'll get into a little bit more later. They are seeded as number 14. They're getting that round, and so they are moving on to potentially continue losing. If the number G Chain right now is seeded at number 8, if they were to lose against the Amphetamines, they would move on to the next round, but then they would face Chubbs as the lowest versus highest in the losers bracket. So again, that gets reorganized every week. So maybe don't pay attention to exactly what it looks like. Just know that if you're the highest seed, you're playing the lowest seed. If you're the lowest seed, you're playing the highest seed.
But to be clear, it's not based on like who's at the bottom of the league. It's all on basically you win once. So even though Chris and Taylor have been battling each other for who's lowest in the standings, if they win one time in the ladder, the consolation bracket, then they're good. So it doesn't matter that records wipe it clean, just like in the winners bracket. Once we're initially seeded, everything else is a clean slate from there.
Yeah, and again, just to summarize and put it very simply, if you're Kirby, you want to win 2 matchups to win the championship. If you make the playoffs, you win 3 matchups, you win the championship. If you are in the losers bracket, you win once, you're no longer eating hot dogs. If you're in the losers bracket and you got that first round bye because you were the number 14 team, you need to win one of your 2 opportunities to not eat hot dogs.
It's real interesting that you say if Kirby, because let's get into some playoff scenarios. Let's talk about these playoffs. And the first thing that I will just throw out there is that you say Kirby's got it, but by the numbers, Kirby only has to, or Brandon only has to outscore Kirby by about 150, 160 points, and Kirby has to lose and Brandon has to win. Theoretically, by the numbers, Kirby has not clinched the number 1 overall seed and that week 1 bye.
You're correct, and we're going to go through some of these scenarios in which there are a few more far-fetched possibilities, just like the one that Blake just mentioned. But yes, Brandon, there's a chance, but you'd have to have a record-setting performance by a lot, and Kirby would essentially have to bench his guys, which who knows? Guys use rest going into the playoffs.
Yeah, maybe he wants to rest him. He knows he doesn't need that. Maybe he wants to give a full rest. I don't know.
So in most scenarios, as of right now, Kirby has clinched the number 1 seed. So Kirby will take a first round bye, and Kirby only needs to win 2 games again to win the trophy this year. Brandon and Keegs have also clinched. Brandon and Keegs will not move in terms of their seeding at all because Brandon is at the top of his division and Keegs is behind Cox. So likely scenario is that Dogs are the number 2 seed and Keegs are the number 3 seed. This is very interesting at this point because we have a lot of folks, we've been saying it all year, who are middle of the pack. And so we'll talk more about that middle of the pack, but let's get into the losers first because there's only a couple of them that are in a tough spot. So right now, Thomas, Taylor, and Chris are eliminated. You are one of those scenarios like Blake had mentioned. You need a lot of help to make the playoffs, but there is still a percentage of chance for you. I think you would need to outscore pretty much 4 people by about 130 to make the playoffs. But
he's essentially that $1 parlay. Like if you wanted a $1 parlay to turn into $1,000, you'd bet on Peyton making the playoffs. Maybe more.
It's probably a 1 to 10,000 type beat.
Yeah.
I'm probably saving my dollar there. Just saying.
Yeah, I'm sitting on my gas station soda right there. So Thomas, Taylor, and Chris and Peyton, for all intents and purposes, are eliminated from the playoffs. But that does not mean they don't have anything to play for. 3 of those matchups are playing spoiler this week, potentially. And then Chris is sitting as the lowest seed right now. But all 3, Thomas, Taylor, and Chris, are 4-9. Chris would, quote unquote, win the tiebreaker because he has the lowest points for as of right now. But if Thomas and Taylor are losing this week, they're kind of maybe in a pickle if Chris decides to win. So any one of those 3 could take the lowest seed.
Here, and I think something you need to say in here too is it could potentially be Peyton as well. Is that correct?
It could be Peyton, but all 3 of those would need to win. It'd need to be 140 more points than Peyton. So it's unlikely for Peyton. Peyton just playing. Peyton's kind of honestly in the no winner zone. Like there's no chance for him to be the bottom seed. There's not really a chance for him to make the playoffs. So he'll be a top seed amongst those in the losers bracket. So Thomas, Taylor, and Chris, you guys still have a lot to play for this week to potentially win. And if the other 2 lose, then, they're fighting for the bottom seed. So, you want to win your matchups this week to try to not be the person who's in that bottom seed. So let's talk a little bit more about those who are in the middle. We have 2 teams at 7-6 and 5 teams at 6-7. There are 3 playoff spots locked. So 4 of those 7 teams are going to make the playoffs. The most interesting thing right now is that Seb and Jackson are going to match up this week, and we'll talk about that matchup a little bit later, but those are our 2 7-6 teams, and neither one of them has a great points for. So this is a win and you're in matchup. Whoever wins this is going to be locked in as the 4th seed, which is, an advantageous seed in the playoffs. But if you're losing, you need a little bit of help because many of the 6 and 7 teams have tiebreakers over you in terms of points for. So Seb and Jack, Seb is at 1261 and Jack is at 1207 for points for. Win and in, lose, you need some help. You're rooting against Victor, Aaron, Glenn, and Blake, but you may potentially beat Matt in a tiebreaker. So then let's talk about the 6 and 7 teams, which is also really interesting because we have a Victor and Matt matchup this week. That's our top points for among the 6 and 7 teams and our lowest points for among the 6 and 7 teams. Vic has a path whether he wins or loses because he is significantly above everyone else in terms of points for in that 6 and 7 chunk. So if Victor loses, he could make it if Aaron, Glenn, and Blake lose, or if 2 of those lose and Aaron doesn't score 26 more points than him. For this list, Victor, Aaron, and Glenn are essentially win and in scenarios. Because we have a 7 jack, one of them will get in, one of them will lose. Victor, Aaron, and Glenn hold pretty comfortable tiebreakers over either of those losers in that matchup. So they're going to be win and in scenarios, Victor, Aaron, and Glenn. Next up, in terms of points for, is Blake at 1232. He's about 100 points behind Glenn. So there's not a likely chance that he can reach Glenn in terms of a tiebreaker. So Blake needs to win.
Depends how many players he decides to either sit or how many players that are out that he decides to play. Which, as a quick disclaimer that I'm throwing out there for anyone in this league, and there are some great friendly reminders, and I know we have things come up. I was in a hurricane. It's fine. If you got to make arrangements, because there's no excuse whatsoever in this league, if you're a dedicated daddy, to not play, to have zeros, unless it's super intentional. And Glenn, I don't think it is. So Aaron's no longer, we're not sending out reminders. I have to throw that in.
Yeah, no more reminders. If you're not setting your lineup, you're a bad person and you deserve to lose. Blake and Matt are our 2 that need the most help. I think they're both sitting around 30% chance to make the playoffs. They essentially need to win and have Victor, Aaron, and Glenn lose in some fashion. So I think Matt needs 2 of them to lose. Glenn needs at least one of them to lose. Blake needs at least one of them to lose. So there are win and in scenarios for Vic, Aaron, and Glenn, but Blake and Matt are not eliminated and have decent chances if they win, but need a little bit of help. I don't know. What do you guys think? And so check out the flow chart on screen. That'll show all of these scenarios again that we mentioned.
That's a fucking gorgeous flow chart.
Look at that flow chart. Our Excel daddy over here. And so this flow chart will walk through everything we said. If that's confusing, if it's confusing, you're a dumbass. So, you got a picture for it. So anyways, all that to say, everything that we mentioned is week 14 matters. It matters for pretty much all but 2 people, maybe 3, you could argue, in this league. So you're either playing spoilers, trying not to be the bottom, or you're fighting to make the playoffs. And again, I think any of these guys that are kind of in the top 10 teams can make the playoffs. And so it's going to be really interesting week 14 with probably more tiebreakers than we've ever seen in the Draft Daddy playoffs. So it's exciting. Set your lineups. You don't get another reminder other than this. And we'll look forward to an exciting week 14. With that being said, boys, let's talk some matchups. And we're going to go in these matchups in order of our opinion on importance. So
that's our opinion.
Speaking of least importance, Blake, why don't you take first matchup here?
It's funny you say that, just because of the 3, this is probably the most, outside of when we're all starting the season out fresh, since we've had 3 podcast hosts where all 3 of us, none of us are in a more like a overly advantageous position. Like we're all fighting for the playoffs. Not one of us is secure. Not one of us is at the bottom. It's super exciting. What?
I think if I look at it,
well, none of us are like, nobody's secure. Nobody's in.
Nobody's
like,
guaranteed.
Like all the way to the last.
I'll give you that. No. We're porridge is too hot, porridge is too cold scenario where Kamish's 82% to get in. I'm 60% and you're 30%. So nobody's at the bottom, nobody's at the top. We're just a little too hot and a little too cold.
Scenario. What if we combine our 3 teams, but then we also, so we admit that one team's going to get last, but we also have one team that's going to win the championship. It's a tertiary championship. And then we split eating all the dogs. Fuck the rest of the daddies. We own the podcast. I don't know. No, I would never, and I do not condone collusion throughout this league. Just even though some people might argue that these 2 teams, at least one of them, I think that Team Keegs might be colluding with Josh Allen. And as it was Tony Romo on the broadcast, was that Sunday night, talking about Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen, You want to talk about this guy who, like, he's not rolling the dice. He's got a game plan and it's worked. Keegs has now made every playoff, but he's going up against, it's a good thing he already secured the playoffs because he's going up against who is likely our number 1 seed, which is Sir Cox-a-Lot. We won't spend a whole lot of time on these less important. Sorry, guys, not to deprioritize you, but when you look at this matchup, I mean, this is top tier matchup with Josh Allen and it'd be the old AFC standoff with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes not been doing very much. Saquon Barkley likely to have another great game against a struggling Carolina defense. Even though they've looked better, they still are not getting wins. And I think these guys might be resting their guys a bit. I know Team Keegs needs that for any week for Ladd McConkey, who he has been a point just taking every target, and it's working, especially when Quentin Johnston can't even catch a ball. I mean, he has one person to throw to. So that's the only real call out I have here. Everything else I think is just status quo for this matchup. I think Ladd playing or not is going to be a real indicator of who wins or loses, but at the end of the day, does it really matter who wins or loses? I'm cheering for Team Keegs because because 11 to him going in. No. Let's let him have an ego. I think that Sir Cox-a-Lot, why not add another win?
And I think that if Sir Cox-a-Lot wins, he ties the best record that has ever happened in our league for a regular season. And we might have to take a look at the points totals, if Ass might have it up, to see what the point total is. Because that might be what he can aim for here.
Let's see. Seb, why don't you give us your feedback or finish your feedback, and then I'll come back to if he has a chance at all-time point.
And the only thing I'll call out here is that Cox has Derrick Henry and Terry McLaurin on bye. So, I mean, I guess if there's a week to beat him, this is it. But again, he's positioned himself so well that it doesn't matter whether or not he wins or loses. Again, he's just kind of fighting for records at this point. Again, I'll remind you guys that the champion gets paid out, second place gets paid out, and highest points gets paid out. So you cannot win multiple of those prizes. If Cox is the highest scoring team but goes on to win the championship, he cannot also win the highest points. So it still matters for everybody. But again, you want to put up more points to have the opportunity to win some money at the end too, if you're not going to win a championship or get second.
Yeah. Seb, what do you think for this matchup, bud?
Yeah, looking through this super quick. The only thing I really want to point out is that we're going to hear a lot this week is just the buys, right? This is another big buy-mageddon as we finish the regular season, the last bye week. And it does hit Cox a little bit here harder than it does Keegs with Derrick Henry going down. If you look through Cox's bench right now with who they have to sit this week, he's got the number 2 running back, the number 3 wide receiver, the number 3 defense, the number 2 kicker, all on his bench. And that might change slightly as far as what a defense looks like, but that has a big impact as far as the points that Cox can score, at least the high points. Sometimes he's dependent on some of those guys to score big. Last week, Scary Terry had 2 touchdowns, and Derrick Henry played well, or okay, I suppose. So I think it might be a little bit closer, but we've seen it with Keegs all season. I think he has really big weeks and some lower weeks. I think this is one of the lower weeks where he's kind of kicked, and frankly, I'm just kind of hoping Sir Cox-a-Lot continues looking good. That way he has a low week in the playoffs and someone can upset him. So I'm going Sir Cox-a-Lot this week.
So it sounds like you two got Cox. I think I got to take Keegs, man. I got to take the spoilers. And, Keegs whooped my ass last week. And again, I think if there's one opportunity to beat Cox, it's, he could beat off Cox in the last week. So I think really I'm going to take Keegs.
Cool. Yeah, really quick, though, and I'm sure Blake just got to it as well. I'm looking at first season of the league. It looks like we had Boylan scored 1724, which looks like the all-time high score. So I don't think it's a question that Kirby's going to beat it this year. The question is just by how much.
Wow. Congrats, Kirby. You need to put up, 40 points? 36 points to take over the most points scored in a season.
That's the highest. In the last 2 years, they were both under that.
Which is wild. We had a 12-person season or 12-person league season and didn't have more points put up.
So, all right. Want to talk about another matchup that doesn't matter?
And we will say it doesn't matter, but it slightly matters.
This one matters a little.
Next up, we've got the Crawdaddies versus the Chubs. And again, we say it matters because Chubs is fighting to not be that number 14 seed. If Peyton wins this matchup, if the Crawdaddies win, then the Chubs are automatically locked in to be that bye team in the losers bracket. But if Chubs wins, it makes it a little bit more interesting to see if the comeback story or the just here for beer will lose and take over that slot. So this is it's for again, all intents and purposes, it's worthless. Neither of you is going to make the playoffs, but it could be interesting. So again, let's talk quickly about buys. We have Joe Mixon, who's going to be on bye for the Crawdaddies, and he's been playing Taysom Hill, who is currently out, and I don't believe is expected to come back. Oh yeah, he's got an ACL injury, so he is not coming back. And he also has Mark Andrews on bye. So the Crawdaddies are going to be playing the waivers this week for a tight end and are likely starting Raheem Mostert or Tank Bigsby as a running back. So it's going to be a slim pickings for the Crawdaddies this week going into, again, a matchup that doesn't really matter, but kind of want to lock Chubb into that hot dog eating position. Chubbs is playing with Geno Smith as a starting quarterback. Rashad White is his running back too. And he's starting Rome and Marvin Harrison, kind of like he has been. Nick Chubb looked good this last game, but again, a lot of these guys are pretty boom or bust. And again, a lot of young talent on this team to the point where they just sometimes don't show up. There's not a lot of consistency. We've seen that throughout the year. So this is going to be a really interesting matchup. It really will depend a lot, I think, for the Crawdaddies on how much Joe Burrow and Puka and if Garrett Wilson can carry them to a victory. I think there's a lot more star power on the Crawdaddy side, but you never know. Aaron Jones can go off. So I think, in my opinion, as the season goes, this one goes to Tarkington Crawdaddies. So we can potentially see one piece of that scenario, the $10 million ticket for Peyton to make the playoffs. I think I got to go with the Crawdaddies because I think that this is going to be a tough challenge for the Chubs.
I think that the Chubs have a couple things working for them, while Tarkington maybe has a few things working against him. One thing we do have to call out is that Chubs loved Kamish. He loved your Chubs AI logo, and he decided he's going to use it, and I'm proud of him for that. He got away from whatever the little animated 8-bit guy that he had to the Peyton Manning Omaha, but so shout out to him for that. I also think that because of that, he's got himself a win coming this week. I don't think that Peyton it's a hard week for buys, and Peyton has been kind of cruising on buys until the last 2 weeks, even though last week he put up a bunch of points. And then the week before, he also had a bunch of people on buys. So Joe Mixon being out this week does hurt him, but I don't think, less to play for Peyton in this one, because I don't really see a 300 or 400 point or 200 points coming out of his team this week. It would be pretty impressive nonetheless. And I think that of any week, Chubb might as well. Chris is going to go ahead and tack on one last win just because why not? I think that same with Cox, bottom of the league all year, but it's the same. I think you've been fighting in the same spot. He's not taking one last L. He's gonna get the W. And I think that Chubbs goes 5-9.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't want to add too much more than that. In week 8, these two did play, and Chubbs won 112-84. I envision this matchup being very low scoring, 20, I don't know, maybe Tarkington scoring 70 points and Chubb scoring 74 points. I don't think it's going to be very high. Joe Mixon being out, he's been kind of like the stud to carry Tarkington. Chubbs doesn't have a whole lot, but they just need one guy to do enough, and I think they get that this week.
One thing that is, to score points, you got to play players that aren't out. And this next matchup has one of our most dramatic daddies. Seb, you are competing with him for that. We'll see. We'll see at the end of the year who wins that. And Mr. wants to not play two positions. I hope he listens, man. I hope he listens. Seb, do you want to walk us through this one? Right now, he doesn't have a run. Oh, no, that's just here for beer. The irony. No running back for just here for beer.
Yeah, the running back may still be just there getting beer somewhere.
Which is really upsetting now that I see that because he's number 1 on the waivers and I'm number 2. And I was hoping by the grace of God that he would not need Isaac Garendo. But it looks like he does. Well, he has 2. Yeah. Oh my gosh, what a bye week. This is rough. Go ahead, Seb. Walk us through it.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, so that running back position will be interesting for Beard. Before I get to that, a quick note on the Rats. Number one would be, appreciate him switching his profile picture too. I sent that to most of the daddies who I thought might make the change, and I appreciate the ones that did that. So I think the Rats was one of the cooler logos in there. And number two, I'm sure we'll get to it as well, but with the Rats, it could potentially be their first time avoiding the losers brackets and getting into the playoffs. So this is a big week for the Rats. Hopefully, a lot of attention being paid as he recognizes the importance of this week. So yeah, looking at the matchup as I get it to load one more time for just here for the beer. That running back position should be interesting. I don't know what they're going to do necessarily. The CMC going down hurt last week will hurt, but like you said, he'll probably pick up at least one running back. But that running back waivers is super slim. At this point of the season, there's not too many people you're picking up and playing outside of an injury situation like this. So knowing that he has to fill both positions isn't going to be great. But these receivers have definitely stepped it up as of late. Jerry Jeudy, put one of the top 10 performances of the year on Monday night. Looked incredible. He plays a Pittsburgh defense, which is much tougher. But that Broncos defense was supposed to be tough as well. So look for him to continue to play well. Sam Darnold has been struggling in Minnesota. So not sure how consistent you're going to get points there. But Judy, Pickens, and Njoku, Watson's even having a couple games, and they're going to need to put up points against Detroit. So look for that his receivers to carry him in that area. For the Rats, he's been all over the place, man. This has been crazy. He does suffer the Nico Collins bye week this week as well, and Austin Eckler, who's been on IR, Cortland Sutton, who's wide receiver 7 on the year. So he's going to struggle a little bit, but these are things he dealt with all year. Nico was hurt all year. Austin Eckler kind of back and forth. Cortland Sutton wasn't the consistent guy that he was, and that's when the Rats were scoring high at the beginning of the year. Look for Mike Evans to have a big week. He's been kind of down lately, so look for him to continue to link up with Baker Mayfield against a struggling Las Vegas defense. I feel like Bijan's put up great numbers every week, and we just kind of forget about him. We're just like, oh yeah, he's just over in Atlanta doing his thing. So I think he can continue to play well. It'll be interesting to see if they have another person step up outside of them. Madison's had his week. Calvin Ridley's had weeks. Dalton Kincaid, Glenn says he needs him. And Jaden Reed's had his weeks too. So I think he needs another guy to step up to get the win this week. And ultimately, unfortunately, I think he does. Just here for the beer, had his week last week. I don't think it happens again.
Yeah, it's with the running back scenario on just here for the beer. Him being number one in the waivers, he's going to get Garendo, which is going to be honestly a quality running back 1 scenario. But whoever's in that running back 2 slot is going to be a guy that it's probably going to be Kamish's favorite, Tajay Spears. So I think that he's going to be a little bit struggling, whoever's in that second scenario. So I for my sake, in terms of playoff chances, I'm going to just take my pick and say that just here for the beer, we saw the potential last week, putting up 140. I think we can see it again. So I'm going with the beer this week.
I like the way you think, because I'm also going to go with just here for the beer, even though the odds of it are highly not in his favor. But I also think that, we have a scenario where we could, outside of Thomas, who is a new daddy, we could have both Jack and Glenn, the 2 daddies who have never seen the playoffs, get in. And being that I'm on the fringe, I don't want to see it. I don't need that here. I don't need that energy. Aaron, I know you don't either. So Glenn, also just as a punishment for playing to 0 point, I'll keep giving it to you. I don't think you get the dub. Just here for beer is gonna pick something out of the magic hat that he has, I hope. But so I'm going with him, but things do look pretty good for the Rats as far as making the playoffs this year. So
and
speaking of another, just talking about you, Mr. Aaron Sir, Mr. Comeback Story, and Jill Stein, I guess he does guess that he's going to try and make the playoffs. Must-win situation, and as we're going to get through the rest of these matchups of these two, for people who have to get a win and get a loss, in a must-win scenario week, both you and Glenn have to be feeling pretty good just based on records and point totals coming across the board. So we've got you and Comeback Story. An important week for Comeback Story, just in the means of being able to avoid that bottom position, the unwanted bye week, the bye week you don't want. So we got Derek Carr going up against the Giants, who, most weeks you wouldn't want to take Derek Carr, but I know you want to hedge against a defense that they're playing against, and I think this is a good matchup for you to take. And you've also got Kamara going in against that same weak defense, but you got Jalen Hurts going up against Carolina, who we were just talking about, and Jalen Hurts is one of the huge point scorers that you see here on Comeback Story. If him and AJ Brown lock up, this team can absolutely be unstoppable with that stack. It's a big if that happens. Another player that I will call out here is Trey McBride, who has been seeing consistent utilization in Arizona, not always seeing it show up in points, with him averaging around 11 points, but in the tight end spot, I mean, he's a top tier tight end this year as far as consistency, and he's number 3 overall. So you can look for some stuff there, but the one last one I'll call out is just that, and Seb Kamish, you called it out at the beginning of the year and you were upset that I pulled this on you and took Blake Corum. It's just because we shared first names. I did drop him, but starting to see Blake Corum getting some more utilization. Not quite enough though to pull away from Kyron Williams yet. It would be something to look out for next year. But Aaron, I'm sorry. I gotta just keep going with my gut, and my gut says that it'll probably be you, but my gut wants it to be the Comeback Story. I think that he's gonna avoid it too. I think we're gonna be tight across the league, and he's also going to get to 5-9 along with Chris and what will be Peyton. So go and Comeback Story on this one.
Yeah, I'll probably stay in that same boat too. I think that's where I want to go for the sake of me getting into the playoffs too. And I think it's unfortunate for the downfall of
selfless podcast today. Very selfless podcast.
I didn't choose that last matchup. So no, I kind of went back and forth here. I'm looking at both of these teams, Aaron, and I'm looking at your team, and I'm sure you look at it every week and you're like, wow, my team should be really good. I should have a really good record. And the fact that, it's been the downfall of your team is really unfortunate. You look at all these players and they've had great weeks. Unfortunately, they just haven't put it all together. And I think maybe to the benefit of you, you finally put maybe the weakest part of your team on your bench this week. You put CJ Stroud, you put him on the bench. I tried to make this happen earlier on this season, and you wouldn't let me do it. So I'm proud of you for that.
Well, forced into it because of a bye. So to probably my benefit, I'm starting a new quarterback. I thought you were going to say my weakest point was Kyle Pitts, who I have benched 3 weeks in a row for Jonnu Smith, who has had a late season resurgence, averaging 20 points over the last 3 weeks from the tight end spot. Hasn't really granted me wins to an extent, but has been my favorite pickup of the year. Jonnu Smith has been electric since I picked him up.
Aaron, you make a lot of great points there. I agree with you. A lot of things. The other thing that I think I could have said, and I'm curious what the rest of the league would have to say, is if you look back at it now, I do think I won the trade. I do think I won our trade.
And realistically, I'd probably do it again because I was in a scenario where I needed a wide receiver. I mean, DK and Keenan Allen weren't going to be able to be my 1-2 all year. I think I would be in the same scenario probably either way. CD just gave me more upside. And of course, the Cowboys have had a disappointing year. So the fact that Jameer has kind of gone off, you knew it year 1, you knew it year 2. So to your benefit or not, like we're both kind of in the same position, right?
I think it was exclusive. I mean, you probably could have gotten a little bit better points from Gibbs, starting him some weeks over Pollard. But...
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and the way that I was sitting with Kamara on his first 2 weeks, Kyron on his first 2 weeks, and Pollard with Jahmyr Gibbs, I was okay with it because Pollard was going to be a quality flex start every week. So, I think my team has deteriorated a bit. Again, going back to it, I would say you win this trade like 60%, 40%, something like that.
Yeah.
Again, I think I'd make it again.
But for all the hate that I got, that I sold the league and that you were going to run away with it and my team was terrible and why would I do that? Not deserved at all.
So you want to talk about another trade that has not worked out for anyone, or like you can make an argument, but even worse is Taylor and myself, and we'll talk about the implications of what the trade did for me, which is fucking nothing. Same as Taylor now with CMC. I think we both got 2 to 3 weeks of solid play from our trade, and after that, that also just deteriorated and has put me into this position, like you just said, Aaron. I needed that trade because at the point of the season, I needed a couple win. I needed to get back on the train. So I still think the trade got me where I am, but I don't think the trade's going to win me a championship, unfortunately. But it's going to be tough to even make a run at the playoffs with the Chicago Dogs, and I don't want to talk about it because it's kind of bumming me out after seeing what some of the other paths of these playoff matchups are.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and...
Go ahead.
I was just going to take it, but if you want it. No, yeah, so I'll go ahead and take that. And I think the first thing you notice when you look at this matchup is just looking at both the teams. This might be the first matchup I've seen all year where every advantage is to one team, right? You look at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight ends, flex, defense, kicker, and Chicago Dogs runs away with it. And frankly, that's what they've done the past few weeks. I feel like they've been absolutely unstoppable. They started off a little bit slow this season, but they've really continued to put it together, and it's really helped that Tua's come back, not even for Tua's sake, for what he is from the quarterback position, because he hasn't even been starting every week for the Dogs, but it's really just been the resurgence of Devon Achane. Jamar Chase has had the big weeks. Brock Bowers, I think, is the league winner possibly at the tight end position. We looked at this with Sam Laporta last year. Brock Bowers is like just uber more athletic than any tight end I think we've seen since maybe Rob Gronkowski, which I think Brock Bowers could possibly be even more athletic and probably not as drugged up as Rob Gronkowski was. But this team, it just has potential from every position to go off every week. Even Jamison Williams, which, might counter a little bit here this week, but there's potential for every player on this team to put up big points. And the Buccaneers have a good matchup this week against Las Vegas too. So I like a lot of this team. I think a lot of this league likes a lot of this team. And right now they're still kind of the underdogs. Chicago Dogs. I am still offended you haven't changed your profile picture, but you'll get to it. On the other side, we're looking at the amphetamines. And Blake, I apologize. I did not send you the direct link to upload to change your graphic.
I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to use it.
Yeah, so I didn't even bother.
Especially with the pick that you're going to go with. I mean, I understand, but go ahead.
Yeah, so, for some reason, the AI that I use wouldn't do a picture of an ass. So that's probably why I didn't come up with something better for you. But yeah, looking at your team, Lions heavy. I know that makes you really happy every week, and you got to root against DJ Moore this week. Jared Goff and David Montgomery, they've had big weeks. I think they've been consistent. David Montgomery losing touches lately. It's crazy. I saw some stat. Aaron, you talked about Jamar Gibbs a little bit earlier with David Montgomery out-touched Jamar, like 19-9 or something last week, and Jamar had like 9.7 yards per carry to like 5 or something for David Montgomery, which is still great.
Yeah, I think it's insane what the Lions were able to do with that offense, because I will be honest, I doubted the fact that they could continue the 2 running back set, and both David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs have continued to be top-tier running backs and must-starts every week, which, again, I think each one of them gets a touchdown every week for like the last 6 weeks. Like, it's something stupid. I saw a stat watching them this past week that they are like the only team to have a rushing touchdown in they've had a rushing touchdown for like 26 straight games, and that's an NFL record by a lot. And it's coupled with the fact that they've got such amazing running backs.
And I mean, they talked about it. Troy Aikman or whoever it was, they talked about on Thursday. This is like, it's the perfect complement, because you have an absolute just like beast running as Demont. Like I would be scared to run against Demont, and then Jamar Gibbs, who just is like a freaking gazelle out there. I mean,
well, and he's the other thing about him is he's so likable. Did you guys see the clip of him with this carrot after the Thanksgiving Day game? Yeah. Shout out him. Yeah, and Dan Campbell's built a culture there, man. Like it's really exciting to watch from the outside and root for them. So Lions, I'm rooting for them to win. And in this matchup, I can't say more than Kamish said. Every slot, the Dogs have an advantage. It's going to the Dogs. I'm sorry.
Yes, I would agree with that. I didn't get to that, but yes.
They say that miracles don't happen in this league, and I don't know if they do happen in this league. I don't think they do. And when you look at every line, every stat line. Now, the one thing I do want to call out is that what we're seeing, granted, maybe not being a full swing like this, but this is a really good example of a mid-tier team being me, who I am definitely on the Buster Boom side of a team. Like, I can have big weeks that get into the 120, 30, 40, 50s, or I have weeks like last week where I'm sub 80 points. And if I want a fighting chance, I have to have a Boom week. The dogs are the exact opposite, like consistent hit. It's insane to see his averages, like total averages versus projected. I mean, he's like point for point. He's almost scoring exactly what he's projected week over week, outscoring it most of the time. And, we have talked so much about Cox, but like he's about to win 8 or 9 straight. And of those in the entire season, he's only had 2 games that he scored under 100. And I know that he just hasn't quite gotten there he hasn't quite reached Cox level, but I think it could be. I think he has a greater head of steam going in. I mean, since Tua's been back, since he's had Tua in his starting spot, the dogs have been truly unstoppable. But I'm not going to give up hope, because when we don't have hope, what do we have? I mean, if we don't believe in ourselves and believe in our teams, then what's the point? Why would we show up every day and want to do this? And so I'm putting hope into the Asheville Amphetamines this week. And I'm putting hope into our playoff chances going into the end of this 2024 season. And I'm putting hope into this next matchup, and that is the Bald Bison. I'm obviously going myself, by the way. I'm putting hope, though. Putting hope.
Is your hope, Blake, in this next matchup that they both lose?
It's weird. It's weird. I've never wanted everybody else in the league to lose as much as I do this week, because there's the stats say that I would also be taking an L this week, which I do love to fight for the dogs for a dog. But anyway, let's get into this next one. We got Bald Bison and the Victorville Villains, another important matchup.
Yeah, and these are 2 guys actually who are hit really hard by the week 14 bye weeks. The Bison are losing Brian Robinson and Michael Pittman, which Brian Robinson has been more valuable than I would have expected him to be. But losing Brian Robinson and Michael Pittman with Charbonnet on the bench and not another quality receiver other than Darnell Mooney in the flex. So we're going to see some waiver wire moves from the Bison this week to fill likely the flex position here. And then on Vic's side, the guys that have carried him all year, Lamar Jackson as QB1 and Zay Flowers as wide receiver 9, are on bye this week. So he's got Justin Herbert, which is a quality replacement. Justin Herbert and Jordan Addison and Jackson Smith and Jigba in his wide receiver positions, which again, those are 2 quality receivers, but Khalil Shakir as his flex is not as great. He got Isaiah Pacheco back this past week, which wasn't really a stellar performance out of Pacheco, but again, took some carries away from Kareem Hunt. So, he's starting Roshan Johnson as well. So this is really kind of an interesting matchup of 2 guys who are kind of beaten down in terms of their positions here this week. And I originally looked at this thinking, okay, I think Vic can take this because Michael Pittman and Brian Robinson are out for the Bison. But now that I'm looking at the Bison a little bit more, is his star players are still there. Darnell Mooney, Amon-Ra, DeAndre Swift, some of these guys who have been relatively consistent week over week are the guys that are playing, versus Vic's consistent guys are the ones on the bench. So I really think, actually, I originally made my pick for Vic, but I think that this is prime pickings for the Bison to make their run to the playoffs. And the Bison need help, but they need to win this to have a chance. And the way things are stacking up, I actually think I like the Bison more than I like Vic. And, maybe to Vic's detriment, but we've been talking about icons all day. Vic's rocking a bull. He's even rooting against his own team. So Vic, you may want to think about changing your icon there, because right now we're kind of all rooting for the Bison to take this one. So Bison needs some help to make the playoffs if they win, but I think that this is the first step in that path. I do think that this is going to be a Bison win.
I also think that this is going to be a Bison win, because it's really hard for these QB-centric teams to get wins when they're on their main QB. Like you said, Justin Herbert, not a bad fill-in for that, especially given the waivers overall, but I don't think that it's enough to fill the gap between him and if Zay Flowers has a potentially, boom week. It is a little disheartening just to see every one of these matchups in comparison, even my projected points and the fact that I don't have people on bye compared to what some of the other paths that people have. These two, man, the cards just didn't fall in my favor, but I'm going to go Bald Bison. That's also kind of what I need for my only hopeful. I need that and Vic to take an L. So I think that Bald Bison also get this one.
Yeah, Aaron, I like the points you made out. I think Vic loses this matchup with their stack being on bye, Lamar and Zay kind of carrying them through a lot of the weeks this season. And I think Bald Bison win this week despite maybe a weaker running back core, but I think they win this week because of their stack with Kirk Cousins and Darnell Mooney. You got a revenge game for Kirk Cousins. I'm back in Minnesota, and I think you've seen countless times over the season, and I mean just on Monday night with Jerry Jeudy, that revenge games are real things. And I think with Kirk being in command of the offense, I think he's going to have an opportunity to try to take advantage of what he knows his weaknesses. And so look for him and Mooney to link up multiple times and have a big game.
Well,
speaking of big games, and we got the last matchup here. What do we call the last matchup?
This 14 matchup of the week. But this is potentially our biggest matchup of the week we've ever had. We've had more daddies sitting at middle of the pack with the opportunity to clinch the playoffs than we've ever had before. And this matchup really matters because win and you're in as the 4th seed, and lose and you're fighting. You're fighting for your life. You're hoping that an ass isn't sneaking up behind you and stealing your last 7 slot in the playoffs. So we're at week 14's most important matchup. It's matchup of the week. We've got the Jacksonville Jackson Connor Stallions, and we're keeping all of that in, ass. We need you. We need some energy out of you because we need to see you put everything you got into winning this last week. So, ass, we're gonna see you come out with some energy against the dogs, and we'll make it a fighting match, and we'll see what happens. But matchup of the week, we got Jacksonville Jack versus our commish, Connor Stallions, both sitting at 6 and 7. Win and you're in. Lose and you need a little bit of help because you're
losing. You need booze. Am I right?
Lose and you need booze. Some of you are going to be boozing this next week. So I'm gonna start with one. I'm not gonna go matchup by matchup, and then we'll switch up match. I want to just call out again, as we've been calling out, the buys that we have. And so on the Stallion side, it's Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. So there's no option here. He's got to play the waivers for a quarterback. So it'll be really interesting to see what he does. And then his bench is almost entirely on buys. Zach Ertz, Devon Vele, and Jaden McNichols, Jeremy McNichols, who had some quality games over the last couple of weeks. So really interesting to see what Seb does on bye. But on the Jack side, he's not worried about week 14 buys, which might approach him full power. So, Seb, this is going to come out after buys hit tomorrow morning. So I don't know who you're scheming for at quarterback, but why don't we give you the quarterback position to start with?
Well, you're right. Yeah, this is going to come out after. So at this point, no one knows the potential plan. And Aaron, you already locked up your quarterback for this week. And Blake, I can't imagine you're going anywhere other than who you have. So the plan right now is to pick up Will Levis. Will Levis this week, pulling him up really quick right now. I feel like he had a solid matchup going into this coming week. Let's see down here, playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, he's not, I think Will is maybe 8th or 9th on the quarterback area to pick up this week as far as quarterback ranking. But he plays the worst defense. And I feel like, Aaron, you say it all the time, you play the matchups, and Will Levis has not looked terrible this season. He hasn't been consistent, which is what I think often what you want. But if you look at week 10 through 13, he's put up 19, 15, 16, 16. And for looking at a quarterback to pick up on the waivers in the last week, I think he could be a viable position. I think he's going to score some rushing touchdown potentially, maybe throw a pick or two as well. But I think he does enough. I think the Titans lean on him enough, especially with Tony Pollard not doing quite as much here lately. Looking at the Jacks, as they have Brock Purdy against Chicago. Chicago's defense has looked pretty solid lately. I don't know what this 49ers offense is going to look like with CMC back hurt again, with that offense, the whole team just kind of falling apart, right? Like they're seeing playoff chances dwindle. I don't know. I just don't think Purdy has enough options this week. I don't think there's enough points scored this week in that game for them to be viable. And I think that Will Levis is able to be the better quarterback.
I don't know if I would say better, but I would agree with you in the means of a viable option for you given your situation. I like that. I like that pickup. That's a good call given everybody else that's available. The only other one that would maybe even be worth a look would be somewhere like Aaron Rodgers. Jameis Winston would trick you into that, but don't forget that he had 3 or 4 interceptions. I think it's a good pickup. When you look at this running back matchup, James Conner and Tyrone Tracy. Tyrone Tracy, it's been that ever since that Giants have made the change at quarterback, it's been a little bit less consistency because you have less real downfield threat. Tommy DeVito being hurt, so not seeing as many points coming out of that position as you were earlier on, but that doesn't change the fact that James Conner has really become just even though he is position ranked 15, kind of like that Joe Mixon or Kenny Walker kind of position, like just really solid points, like you can feel, or Demon, I would say, probably over Kenny Walker or Jahmyr Gibbs, like we're gonna get you above that 12 to 15 point threshold. And I do like that compared to, again, Jahmyr Gibbs, who you can feel pretty good that he's going to get you a bunch of points. And Bucky Irving, questionable, likely going that he'll be back in, but did leave the end of that game, didn't he? Didn't finish out. Yeah, left the game with a hip injury. Yeah,
he came back in.
He did come back in, and against that was, and even in the overtime, I mean, has had some huge weeks in the past few weeks. And if he can keep that train going, then I think that he will. You clearly get the win in this one, but I do think that it's going to be a little bit contingent on that Bucky Irving situation. I think that him and Tyrone Tracy could almost be a wash, but I would give you the edge in Jahmyr Gibbs versus James Conner.
I agree there. And just to comment, Bucky's coming off 2 really quality weeks in a row, and he's kind of riding that high. And I just want to call out too, if we were making some arguments for pickup of the year, I think Tyrone Tracy's one of those out there for if we're giving that award for a quality pickup of the year for the Jacks. Who was?
I think I did pick up Bucky as well. Just saying.
That's another one. Again, Bucky has not. I would not say Bucky has been as consistent the entire season as maybe Tyrone has, but Bucky is definitely ramping up towards the end of the year, much stronger than Tyrese.
Versus running back 29, but I get.
Yeah.
Well, I think that you're in this argument. I don't think you're allowed to make a snap judgment, because the other thing I would say is when Jack picked him up, it was pretty far on the radar. Like it wasn't. He did it, I think, 2 weeks before Tyrone really took over as that number 1 spot. So that and Malik Neighbors. You want to talk about someone riding on the back of, just like me, if I were to play Adam Thielen this week, of teams that aren't that great, but riding on the back of them. And that's what Jack's doing here. Speaking of Neighbors, yeah, what do you see in the wide receiver column?
Yeah, and to call out our trade again, Seb is seeing the benefits of it finally here at the end of the year with Keenan Allen scoring almost 20 points these last 2 weeks. So now he's finally made it into the starting lineup with his team. And I actually really like it. I think that Keenan Allen's got a good matchup with San Francisco as well. The weapons that Chicago has, he's not really going to ever be, I would assume, covered by the number 1 guy. And so I think that Keenan Allen has some good matchups. And Malik Neighbors and Tyreek Hill have been a lot slower recently, especially with the change at quarterback for the Giants, that Malik has not really been the same guy he was the first couple weeks of the season. So I give this advantage actually to the Stallions with Justin Jefferson and Keenan Allen over Tyreek and Malik Neighbors. I don't think that this is necessarily close, but I think that the ceilings are close. I think that the opportunity is there for the Jacks, but it has not been consistency-wise.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would say, I mean, JJ has not been the stud that, I expected him to be. I know that I traded for him and expected him to continue the reign at the top 3 receiver position. He hasn't exactly been that as of late, but, maybe this is the week for that.
Yeah, and to no fault of his own, just because Sam Darnold has not been nearly as dominant as some of the top receivers with strong quarterbacks, playing in. But you're not running with just 1 Minnesota Viking. You're running with 2. You're full on Skull in your tight end position.
Yeah. And not only am I full on Skull, but I'm full on trade or waiver wire. If you look at my entire lineup, there's not a single person that I drafted. Looking at the tight end matchup, TJ Hawkinson and Cade Otton. Just to call it kind of quick, I think this is kind of a wash here. I don't know if I can say one or the other. Cade Otton's played really well. He's been a little bit down since Mike Evans has returned, but I think he's still an elite tight ends in that offense. TJ Hawkinson's looks really good, and I think he's going to continue to get more opportunities as he continues to be healthy, but they're looking for a playoff run here, so I don't think they're going to try to do too much if they don't need to, although I do think there will be a lot of points scored this week. So if I have to lean, I'm going to lean my way, of course, but I think it's closer to a wash.
And to wrap it up, defense and kickers, I'm not even really worried about this matchup. I think that it's pretty much wash all around. Arizona and Seattle, I think, can both potentially be high-scoring, caliber offenses. And on the other side, Tennessee and Jacksonville are both low-caliber, low-scoring offenses. So I think that it favors the Tennessee defense slightly, even though the point estimations might not. And I think the kickers are a wash. So I'll give a slight advantage to the Stallions. With that being said, I think this is going to be a close matchup depending on who we see in the kicker and flex positions, the quarterback and flex positions. Again, looks like we're riding kind of the Tennessee high. So we're going with the Will Levis look. So I don't think it's quite enough. I think that, unfortunately, the bye week handles the Stallions a little bit more, and Jacksonville's going to take a win here, which still leaves the Stallions in a pretty good position to make the playoffs. But I think that in the must-win, the Jacks are going to take this one.
Yeah, I'm actually going to agree with you. And this is not based on feeling. This is based on looking at, I'm really looking at it as the matchups that you see if you consider all of these positions is pretty close to watch, even giving a slight edge to Kamish. I put that edge back toward the Jacks just because of the matchups that he has this week. And, you see, he's got his Giants going up against New Orleans. He's got Tyreek going up against the Jets. I think that Brock Purdy, of anything to get going in that game, Brock Purdy would, they'd have to get it going through the air because Bears have been pretty effective against the run, except for last week on defense. And with Guerrero being his first week as the starter, I think that's less of a threat. So I think that there will be, and James Conner against Seattle. I mean, I like his matchups better than I do yours, Seb. And that for that reason, really that reason only, and also a little bit in the flex position, because I think if you even it out with the flex and giving you the slight edge in some of the overall points and averages, I think when it comes to the matchups, I'm going to give it to the Jacksonville Jacks. And I think he makes the playoffs for the first time.
Well, I appreciate the motivation. I started off the season, you guys just giving me lots of hate, and I ate it, and I ate it, and I ate it. And look where we're at right now with me, the highest percent chance of making the playoffs. So I'll take that hate, I'll eat it, and we'll continue to move on, because at the end of the day, it's likely when I win, I'll take the 4 seed. And if I don't, then I can still take the 7, which obviously is not a favorable position, but I think that's maybe the best position for either one of you. So I'll take that chance, and I'll take my 4 seed. And I apologize, Jack, if it pushes you out of the playoffs. I know you're trying to get there for the first time, but Keegs and I are trying to make it a 4-year streak here, and I'm not letting it end right now.
So basically, what you're hearing is a greedy commissioner who doesn't want to spread the love, and he doesn't want to spread the love.
What a hater.
My league.
What a hater. And I'll say we're all haters, because all of us picked ourselves and the other 2 picked against us in all of our matchups. So shows where we're at this point in the season, hating each other, hoping that we can push each other out of the playoffs. So daddies, that's a wrap. That's a wrap on the regular season. Week 14 is upon us, and the playoffs are looking at us in our headlights. So, it's an exciting time.
Yeah, I've got 2-a-days for the rest of the week. Got to get my guys all hyped up. We need a big win. I'm definitely feeling like the underdog story coming into this upcoming playoff week. And Seb, you are in the most comfortable position. But, it's been a fun season. I think this has been... We do have some outliers, but out of any season we've had for teams and going up to the last week, this is one of the most dramatic finishes for week 14s that I think we've ever had in our league. And that's super fun. It's super fun to see both these matchups and see all these teams vying for it. I think we're always down to like 3 or 4, but we have how many? We have 6, like almost half the league vying for these last 4 playoff positions. And that's pretty fun. So it's been a fun season.
The only thing better than a fantasy football season is getting together with all the daddies. And, that's coming soon.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? That's what it's all about. It's kind of like a holiday on its own, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I'm gonna bring up one last thing. My hot, bold take from week 1 was that Glenn Shin would be vying for a playoff spot this year. And looky there, he's right in the thick of it. So depending on how he can set his lineup this week, he may be there for the first time. Like we said, spreading the love. So Just want to call it out. Glenn, I had some faith in you.
I want to also call it you said, I think it was Keegs and like you were 2 for 3 because you didn't say he wouldn't make the playoffs. You said he would be on the fringe of making the playoffs. And
this podcast will be out, and you're going to have a long extended podcast. So you daddies will get a special week 14. So we're excited to
grab a couple beers.
Grab a couple beers. This is extended feature here.
Hey, last thing, daddies. I love you. These guys love you. Should we all give him a little happy last week of the season smooch?
Sign off in week 14 with some smooches to you daddies. Mwah.
What they talking about? They talking about nothing. 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 Huh? They ain't talking about nothing. Pickable.